What's going on, guys? Welcome back to After the Credits, the review show that no one asked for. Today we are talking about God of War Ragnarok, and I put this game off for quite a long time, and the reason for that is I had quite a few issues with God of War 2018, the reboot, and wasn't really in a rush to get back to this one, but I did throw this game up on a poll on YouTube for you guys in the community to vote on, and this is the game that won that poll. So, finally got around to it and picked it up and played it. And I gotta be honest, I had a really good time with it, and it surprised me in a lot of ways, but there was still some friction here and there that we will get to a little bit later on. But let's not get into too much of it now. Let's roll the intro and get into the discussion on God of War Ragnarok.
What the fuck is going on?
In God of War Ragnarok, Kratos and his son Atreus return for an emotional, action-packed journey through the Nine Realms. As the world teeters on the brink of the prophesized apocalypse, they must confront powerful gods, unravel ancient mysteries, and face the true weight of destiny. Set in a world gripped by a never-ending winter, the story explores themes of family, fate, and redemption, blending brutal combat with heartfelt storytelling. With new realms to explore, deeper character development, and a mythic conflict that spans gods and monsters, God of War Ragnarok delivers a powerful conclusion to the Norse saga. Now, I'm going to come straight out with the fact that, to be honest, I wasn't a big fan of the father-son dynamic that was on display in God of War 2018, and that is one of the main reasons that kind of held me back from getting into Ragnarok. Now, I understand this is going to be a contentious point to make, but for me personally, it just felt like while I was playing through the original game, it just felt like Kratos had a job to spread his wife's ashes on the highest mountain in all of the lands, and since they live in a very secluded area in Midgard, he couldn't find a babysitter, so he just had to bring his young son along for the journey, and it just felt like a game where you babysat Atreus throughout the entirety of the playthrough. Obviously, there's a lot more going on in that story than what I'm explaining, but that's generally the thoughts that I had leaving that game, was that it just kind of felt like a babysitting simulator with Kratos from God of War, which was odd to me. But with all that being said, Ragnarok does continue this tradition of the father and son dynamic. However, Atreus is much older, which is very welcome in my opinion, and it changed the entirety of my opinions on the dynamic as a whole. With Atreus being older, the game is able to approach more mature tones and some more adult themes, I guess you could say, and it makes it much more approachable for me. So, with all that being said, all of that stuff in and out of the way, I absolutely ended up loving the story. I loved everything they did. I loved the character development. It's top notch here. And a lot of that does come down to the fact that they set up a lot of those characters in the original game. So, it does boost my opinion of that original game quite a bit, but ultimately, this is one of the greatest video game stories to ever exist, without a question, especially if you play both of the games, and there's a lot to be said for that. And it's really impressive because it turned a skeptic like myself into a real believer of the concept here by the end of the game. Now, in this game, you play through the 9 realms that are within Norse mythology. I think this is super cool, and it's not something that's really been explored very much throughout gaming, so it's cool to experience this. However, being someone that came from the original God of War series and have played some of those games from the past, I much prefer Greek mythology, and I think that Greek mythology just simply fits Kratos as a human better than Norse mythology. That is just an opinion for me, but Kratos just, when I look at him, he reminds me of a Spartan, he reminds me of Roman legions and things of that nature, because that's what I kind of grew up with him as. So it's always been a little bit of an adjustment for me to get used to him being in another realm here, being the Norse realm, and having the Leviathan axe and things like that are just different from what I'm used to. But it's just here nor there. Essentially, I just like Greek mythology better than Norse mythology, and that does kind of hurt it a little bit for me, but that doesn't really take away from what the game is offering as far as the setting goes. I think it is very cool nonetheless. Just wish it was back in Greece. Now, the performance in this game is predictably absolutely flawless. Sony is not going to release a game in one of their premier franchises with performance issues or any crazy game-breaking bugs. Other than I did have one instance where I broke a command to climb a chain by accidentally interacting with another interactable at the same time as the chain interactable happened, which essentially locked me out of being able to climb the chain. I was able to fix this by just reloading the last checkpoint, and luckily this game is very generous with its save points, so when I reloaded the checkpoint, I was right in front of the chain and was able to climb it without any issue, but that's the only bug that I experienced throughout my entire playthrough. Now, this game is obviously extremely beautiful to look at. The lighting in this game is a work of art in a lot of cases. It's just absolutely astounding what they did with that. But my favorite part is the facial animations. They did an absolutely incredible job with all the characters except Kratos, oddly. I don't know if it's just his beard or what is going on, but there was a lot of emotional, super emotional scenes in this game that happened. And it looks like Kratos is on the verge of crying, but instead of looking sad, it almost looks like a grimace, like he's in pain a little bit, which is a little bit weird for me. But honestly, if there was ever a scene that took place throughout the game where Kratos actually shed a tear, I probably would have bawled my eyes out because I was so invested in the story. But I never really got that. It always kind of looked like he was going to cry, but then when I really started to get in my feels about it, it just kind of looked like he accidentally stepped on a Lego, and I couldn't get that out of my head, and it just kind of made me giggle. So it was kind of all fucked up all around, but everybody else's facial animations were done flawlessly, except Kratos. How strange. So now we're at the part of the video where I start to talk about the negatives. And as I said at the beginning, we're going into this game with some negative connotations that I experienced in the original game that simply wasn't really changed in this game. So there's going to be some rants in the next part of the video, but I just want to make it very clear, these are just my opinions. They don't have to be your opinions. If this is your favorite game of all time, I'm never going to yuck your yum for that. But again, this is my review series, and I'm going to tell it how I see it, and that's just what it is. So without further ado, let's just dive into these. So for those of you that don't know, if there are any of you out there, God of War transitioned from a straightforward hack and slash game into a hack and slash RPG mashup, essentially. For me, I much prefer the original gameplay from the original series, it being just a straight up hack and slash, that is. But I do understand that adding all of these armor sets and different weapon runes and all these other things that the game adds to build depth in the game is almost a requirement for modern audiences. But I just prefer the simplicity of the older games. I just much prefer a linear experience over a game filled with a bunch of systems. Now, along with the modernization of this series, each realm that you go to has a wide, expansive open area for you to explore, and with that, of course, comes a plethora of side activities, side quests, side missions, collectibles, a bunch of things for you to go out and do. And as I mentioned in the previous point, I'm a guy that likes linear games, and maybe I'm just living in the wrong era or something, I'm not really sure, but all of this stuff that's thrown into these games, to me, just feels like bloat to add game time onto a game that is completely unnecessary. I am never a fan of this mechanic, and it seems like every modern game has to do this over and over and over and over again, and I just am not a fan of it, man, to be honest. I just wish we could go back to the days where we had a very driven story that we would just go through, play, and enjoy, and not have to feel obligated to do all this extra stuff. And you know, this game it's got all of that in it. All that modernization is packed in here. So I did do all of this content on offer, including the side quests, for the first 10 hours or so of my playthrough, but ultimately I just decided I wasn't having a lot of fun, so I changed up my approach and started hard focusing the main quest line, and I just did that throughout the remainder of the playthrough and had a much better experience. And I'm glad that I decided to make that change because I was really struggling there for a little bit. Okay, so I'm saving my spiciest take for last. This is the spiciest, maybe the spiciest take I've ever had in any game I've reviewed, to be honest. This is gonna be a big one. So prepare yourself. If you need to go get a bowl of ice water to dip your head in after I come out with this take, go do that, because it's gonna be one of those. But here it is, okay? I do not like the combat in the rebooted God of War games, 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. Don't like it. Now, before you go all explosive on me in the comments section below, let me try to explain why. So this game utilizes a very, very tight third-person camera. You almost feel like you are attached to Kratos' shoulder throughout the entire playthrough, but this game is still a hack and slash at heart, and this just feels terrible in my opinion. You constantly have enemies approaching you from all angles, all sides, but with this camera, you're really only able to focus on what's directly in front of you. Now, the game tries to make up for this by having your AI companions constantly shout out which directions enemies are coming from, and having these really weird arrows at the bottom of the screen that kind of show where the enemies are in proximity to you, and they get brighter as they get closer. But I would honestly give my left nutsack to have a fixed camera back in this series where you could just dictate the entire flow of the battle, see everything going on all around you. That way you can switch your priority to targets as you need to, instead of trying to fight the camera. Now, I understand what I'm saying is an impossible task. This game is much larger in scope than the original games were. You would never in a million years be able to do a fixed camera in an open world game. But this, again, just goes back to the modernization of the series, and modernization that I typically am not a fan of, but that's just my honest opinion. I just don't think it feels good to play this genre this way. And ultimately, it just feels like you end up taking a lot of unnecessary damage because you're fighting with the way the camera is in the game. And I get that having this very close and personal camera does give the game a little bit more of a cinematic feel, I guess, a more visceral feel, which I think they were going for, and they achieved that. It just doesn't feel right in this style of game. Alright, so with all that said, let's go ahead and wrap this review up. Honestly, this is one of the best gaming stories ever told, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I think if you just play Ragnarok and skip 2018, you're probably getting a top 10 video game story of all time. If you play both the games, could easily crack into a top 5 video game story of all time. And the writing is so good in this game, and I was so invested in what was going on, that at the end of the game, I actually shed a couple tears out of my eyes. I actually cried a little bit, which has never happened in a game in my life up to this point, so you gotta give them kudos for that. They absolutely delivered an incredible story here, but with my dislike for the combat and the gameplay, which is honestly the most important part of a video game, is the actual gameplay itself, it's gonna hurt it quite a bit for me. So with that being said, on our S to Cheeks tier list, God of War Ragnarok's gonna go ahead and get an A tier, right in the middle of A tier. And that A tier rating is boosted single-handedly by the incredible story that's being told here. If the story sucked, this game would easily slip to a B, maybe even a C, to be honest, just because of how much I dislike the combat on offer here. So, A tier is a good spot for it. It deserves all of its flowers for the story, without a doubt. But not gonna even be close to an S as far as I'm concerned. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. If you did, I'd really, really appreciate it. And I hope you survived that hot take, man. It might be the spiciest hot take on the internet. To be honest, I don't know. I've not seen anybody talk about Ragnarok, so I don't know if it's a hot take, but it just feels like it's going to be a hot take. So anyways, hope you guys survived it. If you're here, you did, so shout out to you. But thanks for watching to the end. I appreciate the hell out of all of you guys. I gotta say, I need to take a little bit of a break from gaming after beating this one. I plowed through this game in like 3 days or something like that. That's a lot of gaming, like 22 hours in 3 days, which is fucking crazy. So I need to step outside and enjoy the fresh air for a little bit. But hopefully that doesn't put us off track. Should still have another upload for you guys next Friday with a new game or another game. Probably not going to be new. You know how I do it around here, but hopefully back Friday for another video, And with that being said, thanks for watching. I love every one of you. You are all the best. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you on the next one. See you guys.